There's a phrase that narcissistic mothers often use, a phrase that destroys a child's ability to distinguish between love and manipulation. And it's this very confusion that often lays the groundwork for narcissism itself. The phrase seems harmless on the surface, even loving. But Carl Jung revealed something deeply disturbing about it. When parents say, "I love you," but they're not offering love at all. They're negotiating obedience. And the child, unable to grasp the difference, internalizes a devastating truth. Love isn't something you receive simply for existing. It's something you earn through specific behaviors. And so begins the wound that transforms love into a transaction. The wound that builds narcissists. Emily was 6 years old when she first heard it. "I love you, sweetheart, but you need to toughen up." Her mother had just scolded her for crying after seeing an injured bird in the park. Emily couldn't understand why she was being reprimanded for feeling compassion, but her mother made it clear crying was inconvenient. Empathy was a weakness, and if Emily wanted her mother's love, she needed to be different from who she was. The message was crystal clear, even if Emily didn't have the words to articulate it. The self that felt deeply was unacceptable. Only an edited version of herself would be worthy of love. Carl Jung called this the splitting of the self. The child learns that their true self, the one who feels, who has needs, who is vulnerable, is rejected. So they develop a false self, a persona constructed specifically to obtain approval. But here's what makes this particularly destructive when manipulation is disguised as love. The child doesn't realize they're being manipulated. They genuinely believe they're receiving love, but what they actually receive is conditional love, disguised as genuine care. And this creates a deep and toxic programming. To be loved, you have to stop being who you are. When Emily was 8, her mother said it again. "I love you so much, honey, but you need to be more like your cousin, Sarah. She's so disciplined. You're so disorganized." The comparison always came wrapped in affectionate language. "This is for your own good. I'm telling you this because I love you. I want you to be the best version of yourself." But the real message was something else entirely. You, as you are now, are not enough. And if you want my love, you need to transform into someone else. Jung explained that this type of rejection of the true self doesn't just create insecurity. It creates something much deeper and more problematic. It creates the psychological framework for narcissism. Because when a child internalizes that their true self is unacceptable, they have two options. The first is to collapse into complete self-rejection, developing what we call covert narcissism, where the person spends their entire life feeling fundamentally flawed. The second is to inflate a grandiose defensive persona, developing grandiose narcissism, where the person compensates for the deep wound with a mask of superiority. Emily developed the second option. By 12, she had perfectly learned how to operate within her mother's system of conditional love. She became the perfect daughter, excellent grades, exemplary behavior, constant praise from teachers. And her mother, proud, would tell everyone, "My daughter is so special. See, all my effort was worth it." But Emily didn't feel special. She felt empty, because the version of her that received love wasn't really her at all. It was a performance, carefully calibrated to extract approval. Her mother loved the Emily she had molded, not the Emily who actually existed beneath the mask. And here's the most perverse mechanism of manipulation disguised as love. The child becomes dependent on external approval to feel worthy, because from a very young age, she learned that her value isn't intrinsic. Her value is contingent. If she performs correctly, she'll receive crumbs of affection. If she fails, what she believes to be love will be withdrawn. This creates what Jung called the primary narcissistic wound, the inability to sustain an internal sense of worth. The person constantly needs external validation because they never developed internal validation. Their true self was rejected so early and so completely that she doesn't even know who she really is anymore. At 15, Emily had her first breakdown. She got a 93% on a math test. It wasn't a bad grade. But her mother looked at her and said, "I love you, honey, but I'm disappointed. I know you can do better. Why aren't you trying as hard as you should?" And something inside Emily broke. Because she had tried. She had studied for weeks, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. And at that moment, she realized something terrifying. No matter how hard she tried, she would never be truly loved, because the love she received was always tied to a condition, and the conditions were always changing. It was then that Emily's narcissistic armor began to solidify in a different way. If she couldn't earn genuine love, she would earn admiration. If she couldn't feel sufficient, she would become indispensable. She became valedictorian, the student body president, the daughter that all parents wished they had. And her mother, finally satisfied, would say with pride, "I always knew you had potential. See how good it was that I never let you settle." But Emily didn't feel gratitude. She felt anger, a deep and repressed anger against the woman who had conditioned her love on increasingly impossible performances. Carl Jung taught that this repressed anger becomes part of the shadow. The child cannot express anger against their parents because they depend on them for physical and emotional survival. So the anger is buried, but it doesn't disappear. It transforms. In adulthood, this anger resurfaces as emotional coldness, an inability to form real intimacy, and narcissistic behaviors where other people are treated exactly as the child was treated, as objects who need to perform to deserve care. When Emily was 23, she was in her first serious relationship. Ryan was kind, attentive, genuinely in love with her. But whenever he tried to get emotionally close, Emily felt an internal wall rise up. She couldn't trust his love, because she had learned that love always comes with hidden conditions. Love always precedes manipulation. So she tested Ryan constantly, created situations where he would have to prove that he loved her. But no matter how many times he proved it, it was never enough for Emily to believe it. Because the narcissistic wound cannot be healed with external love. It can only be healed by recognizing and integrating the true self that was rejected in childhood. Here's the most tragic part, and what most people fail to grasp. Emily wasn't consciously manipulating Ryan. She was repeating the only pattern of love she knew: conditional love, transactional love, love that needs to be constantly negotiated and re-earned. She had internalized her mother's model so deeply that she didn't realize there was another way to love. And so, the cycle continued. The narcissistic mother had created a narcissistic daughter, not through obvious abuse, but through something far more insidious: emotional manipulation, disguised as maternal love. Carl Jung explained that what makes this type of trauma particularly difficult to heal is precisely the fact that it's packaged in the language of love. If Emily's mother had been overtly cruel, Emily could have named the abuse. She could have separated herself psychologically. But because the cruelty always came prefaced with, "I love you," Emily couldn't distinguish where the love ended and the manipulation began. They were fused in her mind, and this created a deep psychological confusion. If this is love, then love hurts. If this is care, then care means control. And if this is what mothers do, then it's normal to treat the people you love as objects that need to meet your expectations. The first time Emily said, "I love you, but," to Ryan, she didn't realize she was echoing her mother. She said, "I love you, but you need to be more ambitious. You need to have bigger goals. The way you are now, I don't see a future for us." And Ryan, hurt, responded, "You don't love me. You love an edited version of me, the version that meets your expectations." His response sparked something in Emily, a visceral memory of feeling exactly like that in childhood, of knowing that her mother didn't love her. She loved her performing version, and for the first time, Emily began to see the pattern. But seeing the pattern isn't the same as healing it. Emily broke up with Ryan, not because he wasn't good enough, but because she couldn't stand the mirror he was offering. He was showing her who she had become. And it was unbearable to recognize that she had transformed into the person who hurt her the most, her mother. Carl Jung taught that the process of individuation, of becoming who you really are, requires confronting the shadow. And for children of narcissistic parents, part of the shadow is just that, the unconscious identification with the aggressor. You spend so much time trying not to be like your parents that you don't realize when you start imitating them perfectly. Because you've internalized their patterns, they've become your default programming, and without active awareness and deep work, you simply repeat them. 2 years after breaking up with Ryan, Emily had a moment of awakening. She was having lunch with her mother, and her mother, looking at her with that familiar look of critical approval, said, "You look great, honey, but I think you should consider getting a nose job, just a little tweak to improve it. Not that you're not pretty, you are, but you could be more." And something inside Emily finally snapped. No more. She looked at her mother and said, "You never loved me, did you? You loved the idea of who I should be, but you never loved me for who I am." Emily's mother reacted as narcissists always react when confronted: denial, blame-shifting, victimization. "How can you say that after everything I've done for you? I sacrificed my whole life to give you the best opportunities. And this is how you thank me?" But this time, Emily didn't back down. She said, "You sacrificed my whole life to transform me into who you wanted me to be, but you never asked who I wanted to be." And then she did something she had never done before. She walked out without apologizing, without trying to fix it, without giving in. It was the beginning of Emily's true individuation. But the path would be long and painful, because recognizing the manipulation is just the first step. The second step, much harder, is unlearning all the patterns that have been programmed, and that requires deep therapeutic work. It requires confronting the primary narcissistic wound at the root. It requires grieving the childhood you never had. It requires anger, a lot of anger, against the parents who should have loved you unconditionally, but only loved you when you met their expectations. Carl Jung taught that repressed anger turns into neurotic symptoms, but conscious anger, felt fully and then integrated, turns into the strength of individuation. It's the anger that gives you the energy to separate psychologically from your parents, to establish boundaries that never existed, to say no when your whole life you've only known how to say yes. And it's this conscious anger that breaks the generational cycle. Because when you feel the full anger of what was done to you, you never want to do the same to someone else. Emily started therapy at 26. In the beginning, she couldn't talk about her mother without defending her, but she never hit me. She always gave me everything I needed materially. She loved me. She just didn't know how to show it right. The therapist gently but firmly asked, "Is love making a child feel that they're only acceptable when they meet impossible expectations?" And Emily, for the first time in her life, answered, "No, it's not." And she began to cry, a deep, ancient cry that had been repressed for 20 years, the cry of the child who was never loved for who she was. That cry lasted sessions, because it wasn't the cry of a specific event. It was the cry of an entire childhood of subtle and constant rejection of the true self. It was the cry for the 6-year-old girl who was scolded for feeling empathy, for the 8-year-old who was compared to her cousin, for the 15-year-old teenager who was never enough, and for the existential emptiness of having spent 2 decades performing to obtain crumbs of approval that never transformed into genuine love. Jung taught that this grief is essential. You can't heal what you don't mourn. And most people avoid this grief because it's devastating to admit that you weren't loved the way you deserved. It's devastating to recognize that your parents, because of their own wounds and limitations, couldn't give you what you needed. But it's exactly this grief that liberates, because when you finally cry for what you didn't receive, you can start giving it to yourself. Emily spent the next 3 years in an intense process of internal reparenting. Every time she heard the critical voice of her mother in her head saying, "You're not good enough, you need to be better, you're disappointing," she consciously replaced it with a new voice, a voice that said, "You are enough, exactly as you are. You don't need to perform to deserve to exist. Your value is intrinsic, not contingent." It was difficult because her mother's voice had been etched deeply into her psyche for decades, but slowly, repetition after repetition, the new voice began to strengthen, and something interesting happened. As Emily developed genuine internal validation, her need for external validation diminished. She no longer needed constant praise. She no longer needed to prove her worth through ever greater achievements. She no longer needed to control how people saw her. Because for the first time in her life, she had a stable internal center. A self that didn't depend on external approval to feel real. Hold on, because the most important part about healing from a narcissistic wound built by manipulative love comes now. Emily had a dream that changed everything. In the dream, she was a child again. She was in her childhood home. Her mother was in the kitchen, but this time there was someone else in the dream, an adult woman that Emily didn't immediately recognize. The woman looked at Emily as a child and did something that had never happened before. She knelt down, looked the child in the eyes, and said, "I see you. I see who you really are, and you are beautiful exactly as you are." It wasn't until Emily woke up that she realized. The woman in the dream was herself, her adult self, finally offering the inner child what her mother had never been able to give: unconditional acceptance. Carl Jung taught that dreams are messages from the unconscious, and this specific dream marked a profound turning point in Emily's psyche. For the first time, she was no longer waiting for her mother to change. She was no longer trying to earn a love that would never come. She was becoming for herself. What she needed, the good inner mother, the presence that sees, accepts, and values the true self without conditions. But here's what's crucial to understand, and what most people get wrong. This internal reparenting doesn't mean pretending the wound doesn't exist. It doesn't mean spiritual bypassing, where you force positive thinking about unprocessed pain. It means the exact opposite. It means feeling the full pain, recognizing the extent of what was lost. And then, from that total recognition, starting to build something new, not on the wound, but through it. Emily developed a personal protocol that her therapist called dialogue with the true self. Every morning, before starting her day, She dedicated 10 minutes to asking herself, what do I really want today? Not what I should want, not what would impress people, but what does my true self, the one that's been silenced for decades, really desire? In the beginning, there was no answer, just silence, because Emily's true self had been repressed for so long that it no longer knew how to speak. But slowly, whispers began to emerge, small truths. I don't want to work 12 hours today. I want to walk in the park. I want to call that friend who makes me laugh, not the one who judges me. I want to eat pizza, not salad. They seemed like trivial desires, but they weren't. They were the first signs of an authentic self reawakening, and each time Emily honored these small desires, she was practicing something revolutionary: self-respect. She was saying to her internal system, your needs matter. Your desires are valid. You don't need to justify your existence. And the more she practiced this, the deeper the truths became. I don't want this job. I stayed in it because my mother approved, but it kills me inside. I don't want to live in this city. I live here because it's impressive, but I hate the frenetic pace. I don't want to be alone, but I also don't want to be with someone just to avoid loneliness. These truths were terrifying because they meant real changes. It meant dismantling the entire life that Emily had built to get approval. It meant starting from scratch, this time building from the inside out instead of the outside in. At 30 years old, Emily did something radical. She resigned from the corporate job her mother loved, moved to a small town in the countryside, adopted 2 rescued dogs, and started working in a local library. Her mother was horrified. You threw away your future. You had so much potential. How could you do this to me? And for the first time, Emily responded without guilt. I didn't do this to you. I did this for me. And if you can't love me in the life I've chosen, then you never truly loved me at all. Emily's mother stopped speaking to her. For 2 years, there was no contact. And Emily, to her surprise, didn't feel devastated. She felt free, because those 2 years, without the constant critical voice of her mother, allowed Emily to finally listen to her own voice. And she discovered something wonderful. She liked who she was. When she wasn't performing for anyone, she was kind, funny, genuinely empathetic. That quality that was punished in childhood but never completely died, only buried in the shadow. And she was enough, not extraordinary, not exceptional, just humanly enough. And that, for the first time, was more than enough. Carl Jung taught that the process of individuation is not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. And wholeness means integrating all parts of yourself, the light and the shadow, the successes and the failures, the performances and the vulnerabilities. Emily was finally becoming whole, not the edited version her mother approved of, but the complete, imperfect, authentic version of herself. When Emily was 32, she met Daniel, and this time, the relationship was completely different. Daniel loved her for the person she really was, not for a performance. And most importantly, Emily was able to receive that love because she had finally developed the ability to believe that she was lovable, without conditions, not because she was perfect, but because she was human, and humanity, with all its imperfections, deserves love. But hold on to this about generational transmission, because it's going to make sense when I talk about the most important decision of Emily's life. If you've just discovered deep patterns of manipulative love that shaped your narcissism, or that of someone close to you, the super thanks down there isn't just financial support, it's you saying this truth about how conditional love builds generational wounds. needs to be known. When you click that golden heart, you help free other people from the webs of manipulation, disguised as affection. Every video like this requires deep research into Jungian psychology and child development. You're not just a spectator, you're a conscious survivor, breaking cycles, and together, we're bringing to light how narcissists are systematically built through what should be the safest thing of all, parental love. Emily and Ryan decided not to have children, not because they didn't want them, but because Emily was afraid of repeating her mother's patterns, afraid of, without even realizing it, saying, "I love you, but," to a defenseless child, afraid of passing on the generational wound to yet another generation. And she was honest with Ryan about it. "I carry deep shadows," she confessed, "and I don't trust myself not to project them onto a child." Ryan, who had done his own therapeutic work on childhood traumas, responded with something that shifted Emily's perspective. He said, "You know what the difference is between your parents and you. They never questioned their patterns, never went to therapy, never wondered if the love they offered was genuine or manipulative. You've spent 6 years doing exactly that work. You've confronted your shadow. You've recognized the patterns, and you consciously choose every day not to repeat them. That doesn't guarantee perfection, but it guarantees awareness. And awareness is what breaks cycles." 3 years later, Emily and Ryan had a daughter. They named her Luna. And Emily, holding her newborn daughter for the first time, made a silent promise. "You will be loved for who you are, not for who I want you to be. You won't have to perform to deserve my affection. You won't be my project. You will be yourself, and that will always be enough." But promises are easy. The test would come in the daily reality of being a mother, and Emily failed. Many times. There were moments when, tired and stressed, she felt her mother's voice emerging from her own mouth. "Luna, please stop crying. You're being dramatic." And every time that happened, Emily stopped, breathed, apologized to Luna. "It's not dramatic to feel what you feel. I was wrong. Your emotions are valid. Cry as much as you need to." These real-time corrections were what broke the cycle, because Emily wasn't perfect, but she was conscious. And when you're conscious, you can repair. You can recognize when you fail. You can apologize. You can model for your child that real love isn't absence of error. It's presence of responsibility. It's the ability to admit when you hurt someone and do differently next time. Carl Jung taught that no one can give what they haven't received without first doing conscious work of internal reconstruction. Emily didn't receive unconditional love, but she did the work to build it internally. And now, imperfect but conscious, she could offer Luna what she never received, the experience of being seen, accepted, and loved exactly as she was. When Luna was 4 years old, she said something that made Emily cry. They were drawing together. Luna made a chaotic drawing, full of colors that didn't make traditional sense. And Emily, genuinely curious, asked, "Tell me about your drawing." And Luna responded, "It's happiness, Mommy. Happiness is colorful and messy and doesn't have to make sense." And Emily realized her daughter felt safe enough to be authentic, to create without fear of judgment, to exist without needing to justify or perform. Luna had something that Emily never had in childhood, permission to be herself. But that didn't mean Luna would never feel pain, nor that Emily would never make mistakes. It meant that when Luna felt pain, she would have permission to express it. And when Emily made mistakes, she would recognize them. Perfection wasn't the goal. Authenticity was. And authenticity, with all its stumbles and reparations, heals generational wounds in a way that feigned perfection never could. Emily still had difficult moments, Days when her mother's voice was deafening. Days when the old primary narcissistic wound opened and she felt once again not enough. But the difference was that now she had tools. She had an internal self, strong enough to question the critical voice. She had a partner who loved her unconditionally. She had a daughter who mirrored her, showing her what real love looked like. And she had years of therapeutic work that gave her something precious, compassion for herself. Because here's the ultimate truth about healing narcissism built by manipulative love. You don't go back to being who you were before the wound. You can't. That child was irrevocably changed by what they lived through, but you can become someone new, someone who carries the scars but isn't defined by them. Someone who intimately knows what it's like not to be loved unconditionally, and exactly because of that, becomes capable of offering that love to others and to themselves. Carl Jung said something profound about this. We are not healed by getting rid of our neurotic symptoms. We are healed when our symptoms lose their power over us. Emily's primary narcissistic wound didn't disappear, but it lost its power to control her life. She no longer needed constant external validation because she had developed solid internal validation. She no longer needed to manipulate to get love because she had learned that real love cannot be manipulated, only offered freely and received with vulnerability. And most importantly, she no longer needed to repeat her mother's patterns because she had consciously chosen every day to do differently. Not perfectly, but consistently. And imperfect consistency over years is what transforms generational wounds into generational wisdom. When Luna grows up, she'll carry her own wounds, because there's no such thing as perfect parenting. But she'll carry something that Emily never had, the lived experience that love doesn't require performance, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that you don't have to transform into another person to deserve affection. And when Luna encounters her own shadows, she'll have the model of a mother who confronted hers, a mother who chose awareness over repetition, a mother who proved that cycles can be broken. Emily is now 38 years old. Her mother eventually started talking to her again, but the relationship is different. Emily has established firm boundaries. She no longer accepts criticisms disguised as advice, no longer tolerates conditional love. And surprisingly, her mother, confronted with real limits for the first time, has begun to respect them, not perfectly, but enough. Because even narcissists can learn new patterns when the consequences of not learning become unbearable. And sometimes, in the quiet moments of the night, Emily looks at Luna sleeping and feels something she never felt in childhood. Peace. Not the peace of having conquered something, but the peace of simply being, of existing without need for justification or performance. And she whispers to her sleeping daughter, "You saved me, not because you completed me, but because loving you unconditionally taught me to finally love myself." This is the truth that narcissistic parents never understood, and it's what breaks generational cycles. Real love doesn't require the other person to change. Real love creates a safe space for the other person to be. And when children grow up in that space, they don't develop narcissistic wounds. They develop a strong, true self. And the difference between the two things isn't just psychological, it's existential. It's the difference between spending your entire life seeking external validation or building internal validation, between repeating toxic patterns or consciously choosing new paths, between love that manipulates or love that liberates. Carl Jung dedicated his life to understanding how childhood traumas shape the adult psyche, and he discovered something simultaneously devastating and liberating. You can't change what was done to you, but you can change what you do with what was done. The narcissistic wound built by manipulative love is real, deep, and lasting. But it's not a life sentence. With conscious work, deep therapy, and the courage to confront your darkest shadows, you can individuate. You can become who you really are, not who your narcissistic parents tried to mold you to be. And when you do that work, something miraculous happens. You not only heal yourself, you heal the lineage, backwards, understanding and having compassion for the wounded parents who wounded you, and forward, offering to your children what you never received. You become the inflection point where generations of trauma stop and generations of healing begin. And that, in the end, is what Jung called individuation, not becoming special, but becoming entirely, authentically human, with all the imperfections, vulnerabilities, and yes, the exact sufficiency of who you always were beneath the masks you were forced to wear. Did you recognize the pattern of conditional love disguised as affection in your childhood? Comment, manipulated love, if you spent years confusing control with care. And if you've already confronted this pattern and are breaking the cycle, comment how much therapeutic work it took. Your stories of healing validate others who are still at the beginning of their journey.